What's up, COD fans? Welcome back to Checkmate Gaming. My hold shift dealing with power rankings before we get into the Seattle home series. There's been a lot of roster moves. I'm making another video to talk about them more specifically as far as what it might mean for all of the teams involved, not just this weekend, but also ones that are going to have some practice time to get their new rosters in the mix. But this episode, just power rankings. So let's dig into it. I will say this before we start showcasing some of our squads. This is the most difficult power rankings to date. I've got the top two teams definitively down, the bottom team definitively down. Everybody else, especially not those roster changes in the mix, I don't even know. There might as well just be a giant tie for third. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about some of these. So make sure you get down to the comments when you hear something that kind of perks your ears up a touch. But let's get in. Number 12. Los Angeles Guerrillas. They did not play this last weekend, and candidly, that's good for them because they need the rehearsal time. This is a team that has not looked good since the roster changes, maybe with the exception of one or two different times where things were starting to look a little bit better for them against weaker teams, but this LAG team is struggling immensely. They're sitting over here in dead last for both respawns. Minus 37 points on average is what they lose their hard points at. They are 5th in search and destroy, which is good news, but then again in domination, dead last with 13 points on average that they lose by. Going into this upcoming weekend, they will be playing up against London first. And that brings me to my next point with LAG is that they have not played a lot of the teams near the bottom side, or at least at one point, were on the bottom side of my power rankings. Have not played Paris, have not played Toronto, had not played New York, have not played London. Beyond that, though, there's not a lot of good news to find for LAG anywhere because they've only won 2 games. So it's tough scenes right here for LAG, but this weekend they're in a pool where honestly, anything can happen. They've got London, New York, and Seattle in the pool. Will New York play consistently? Hopefully. Seattle, are they still as good as the last time we saw them? Who knows? And then London, just coming off of a roster swap, what are they going to look like? So this is a pool where if LAG are going to make some moves in the standings, it has to be this upcoming weekend. Similarly so, in my 11th spot, I've got the Seattle Surge. This is a significant drop for them after Chicago where they looked relatively good. The biggest problem is the only team that these guys have beat are the Los Angeles Guerrillas. So that is going to put them a little bit lower in my rankings because of it. Seattle overall, you take a look at their stats, 10th in hardpoint, minus 7 points on average. Still last in the search and destroy, but the margin is getting slimmer as they found ways to win in search and destroy. But more importantly, and this is where Seattle fans, you can rejoice, you've got a very good domination team. They're 3rd overall in dom, 8 and 6 with a plus 1.86 differential, which is not much. But they score on average 164, almost 165 points, which is actually, I think, actually the highest in the league as I'm looking through this. Yeah, it sure is. So they score the highest amount of points in the league on average. It's just not at the largest deficit. So maybe need to play a little bit more defense than they are offense currently. But regardless, Seattle, like we mentioned, will be playing up against New York first in that very pivotal Group A this weekend. This is a pool where, again, for all 4 of these teams, you're going to hear my must takeaways. They have to get out of this pool. You have to. Otherwise, your season might just be in shambles as we're getting closer and closer towards the end. Going into my 10th spot, a significant drop for the London Royal Ravens this week. I mean, it was one of those things that, yeah, you beat Optic Gaming in 5, but outside of the search and destroy, you kind of got smacked around by the Atlanta FaZe. And then the second time versus Optic Gaming, they kind of got pooped on with the exception of the hardpoint, which is just a 1 hardpoint differential between the 2 of them. But taking a look at their individual statistics, this is where things, again, I think what kind of merits my drop so low for them. They're 7th in hardpoint, 7th in search, pretty okay differentials, but their domination got significantly worse this last week. They're just 4 and 9 in the mode overall, and it's actually a drop for them from what was 8th down to 10th after their performance this last weekend. It's just one of those things that you get blown out by Optic Gaming the first time around and really the second time around, and you keep the Atlanta FaZe close. It just feels like this team's a little bit all over the place. Yes, Jerd will be benched now for 0. It's the anticipation coming through. We'll spend more time talking about that roster move in a future video, but I just don't like my hopes for London going into the most immediate weekend where, again, they had to play LAG. You have to beat LAG. If you don't beat LAG, this very well could be a significant drop for this team, maybe down to the worst position, depending on how things go this upcoming weekend for them. In my 9th spot, I've got the Paris Legion with, again, a pretty significant drop down 3 spots. This one's going to feel a little bit more logistically wise than maybe the London Royal Ravens one would. You take a look at what they've had to do this weekend. They did play against Atlanta and Optic Gaming. To be fair, round 11s in both search and destroys, but we've had this conversation before about Paris trying to close out search and destroys. Beyond that, 2 of the 3 hard points that they played were also within 30 to 35 points. So that's good news. The bad news is you got blown out by Optic in the Dom, and you take a look at their individual statistics, and you're looking at an 8th, a 4th, and an 8th, which you think, hey, that's pretty darn good. But from where they were the week before, they were 6th in hardpoint. They were 7th in domination, so it's a pretty significant drop here for these guys across all of their game modes, with really the exception of the search and destroy, which, because they both went round 11s, they stay in 4th, and they don't have that much of a big differential there, growing from one week to the next. But still, Paris, you got to find a way to close out games. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to merit you continuing to be in that top 6 spots, which we had them in previously. Going into my 8th spot, I've got the Toronto Ultra, who did look very good, not just this week, but also when they played back in Dallas before this. They had a couple of very solid sets. But for Florida specifically, you're able to beat New York, you beat Minnesota, and you go Game 5, a very tight Game 5 versus Optic Gaming LA. And initially, I had them a little bit higher than this, but it was hard for me to put them over any other teams that are above them currently, mostly due to the fact that they've been inconsistent in the past. Things are looking up for Toronto. They're very close to potentially not just becoming a routine playoff team, but maybe they can find themselves into a grand finals here in the not too near future. They do have the week off coming up, but you take a look at their stats specifically. They're 11th in hardpoint, which, again, that's my biggest downswing. I will say, though, they are getting better. It was a minus 23-point differential before. It's now just a minus 10-point differential. So this last weekend was good for them in that department specifically. In 6th place, they are in the search and destroy for the rankings, but they, again, had a better differential from going from last week to this week. And then most importantly, their domination got so much better from 10th last week to 7th this week with a much better differential. It was just so much better to see them going 3-0 in the mode and whole. I mean, that's just impressive to say the least. But the fact that they're getting better and better in respawn is going to make this outlook for this team go up and up in my mind. Now moving forward, we're taking a look at the final spot in the bottom 6, and this is where I have Optic Gaming LA in the 7th spot. We've talked about Optic Gaming before. It was a remarkable turnaround for them. Overall, hardpoint looking much cleaner. Their domination was better across the board until they played Toronto and Atlanta in the late stages, and their search and destroy was right about where you would expect it to be. But the good news was, out of the 3 round 11s that you played, you took away 2 of them. So that's the good news here for Optic Gaming LA. And you got to remember that their loss to London the first time around was a tight one in the hard points, and their loss to the Atlanta phase, same situation for the second hard point and the search and destroy. The only mode that they really did not look that they were at Atlanta's caliber was in the domination. So Optic's on the rise for me right now. There are some potential rumors floating around about maybe somebody joining the squad, not just Chino. We'll keep that under wraps, maybe talk about it in our Rostermania video, so make sure you subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell, get ready to know about who might be joining Optic in the near future. And I mean that when I say the near future. Then we go into our top 6, though. Overall, this was where things get a little bit wonky, but I feel like it's pretty much, I won't say easily agreed upon, but I think the logic will kind of come through for everybody. I've got the New York Subliners in 6 with a 3-point bump here. They lose to Toronto the first time around, sure. Really only the map they looked bad in, though, was the search and destroy. And then they smoke Florida. They beat Minnesota. I shouldn't say they smoked Florida. They beat Florida, they beat Minnesota, and they go 5 versus the Atlanta phase in a tight one. This is one of the things that I like to see. New York, at the beginning of the year, I was high on this roster saying they've got a lot of talent, they've got a lot of veteranship, they've got a lot of experience. What they were missing, apparently, was that new guy who could bring the vigor to the squad, and since Mac has been in the mix, everybody else has become better because of it, and that's one of the reasons why I've got New York so high. Taking a look at their statistic climb here, they are 6th now in the hard point. That was previously 8th the week before. They stay 10th in the search and destroy, and that's the one area where I'm really looking at New York to improve. Yeah, they went 3-2 in search overall, but again, a couple of rounds that really kind of got away from them when they really shouldn't have. They should have kept some of those maps a little bit closer. And then the domination, that's another point of progress where it needs to start being better. Granted, they did go from a minus 22-point differential in 12th to a minus 15-point point differential in 11th. But again, they went 2-2 in the mode as a whole. The respawn is going to be better, I think, as we go and as we go and as we go. As they get more experience, this New York team is going to get better and better in the respawn. But for me, the search and destroy and the domination, where things become more objectively focused, that's what I'm looking at this team to potentially do better at if they want to be a little bit higher up. Granted, they're in a pool coming up where they should be just fine. They've got Seattle first, LAG, and London. If they just repeat their performance from last week, they should be in a playoff once again here this upcoming week. For Florida, I've got them dropped to 5th from 3rd previously. And I mean, 0-6 in maps, that's what's going to reach out to you first. But I will say, in both of those 0-3 losses, there were at least, out of the 6 maps they played, 4 very tight maps. I think you might even be able to argue 5. 210 to 250, 194 to 250 in both the hard points, around 11 search, and then you've also got a 154 to 162 in the one of the dominations, which are relatively close. But overall for Florida, you take a look at their differential here. Again, not great in the search and destroy. Still holding a pretty positive record in both, not just the hard point, but the domination, as well as their point differential. Still pretty far up there. So that's the good news for Florida. You just clean up your search and destroy, you'll be going in good moves. Again, Awakening will be joining this roster. That's a definite to keep in mind. Again, we'll talk about that in our Rostermania video coming up. But it'll be interesting to see with Mox gone, no more Pristini as an option. Will this Florida team just still be here in the top 6? Or will they take some kind of realigning and maybe they drop a little bit for a while? Who knows? In my 4th spot, the Minnesota Rocker. Yes, I know Minnesota did not have the greatest of weekends previously, but they were able to take a 3-0 versus Florida. They had a pretty close 4-game series versus Toronto. And even the 0-3 loss to New York. Again, remember, that very well could have been the other way around. It was a 249 to 250 hardpoint, around 11 search, and a 150 to 159 domination. About as tight as it gets overall. But you take a look at their statistics, it is actually a pretty significant drop for them. They were previously the best hardpoint team coming into this week. They're now 3rd, and they lose 8 points off their differential. Still 9th in search, but their differential again is getting better. And then still 6th in domination with a slight hit to their differential from the previous week to this week. For me, going forward, Minnesota is in a pool where they need to make the playoff, I think, in my mind. They've got Optic Gaming first, and they're in a pool with Chicago and Paris. So really, you're looking at Minnesota versus Optic Gaming likely in that one, but I would not sleep on Paris making something happen in that pool, depending on if they could come out hot in the first opening day. Moving further forward, though, again, in our 3rd spot, I've got the Chicago Huntsmen. I was a little stretched to put them in this position, but when you take a look at their overall differentials, it starts to make sense. 2nd in hardpoint, 2nd in search and destroy, 2nd in domination. You're probably sitting there wondering, why do you not have them in 2nd then shift? Yes, they hold a better record versus the Dallas Empire in total, but the last time we saw them play, they kind of got smoked by Dallas, which is why I have them in the 3rd place currently, which of course leads me to our number 2 and number 1 teams. Number 2, I've got the Dallas Empire. It's one of those things that, I would have loved to have put them higher, but the Atlanta FaZe won the last weekend, and they did it relatively convincingly. Yes, you could argue that Dallas has done the same, and they technically hold a better win-loss ratio versus Atlanta, but I still like what I see from Atlanta on a consistent basis more than what I've seen so far from Dallas. Again, 4th in hardpoint, 3rd in search, 4th in domination, and that's been the biggest thing, is their domination has actually been flawless in the last weekend when they played in Chicago. They have another weekend off, though, coming up this near weekend, so they've got some time to try to correct some of their things and try to see if they can keep the steam rolling. If they can, and they could take Atlanta down another time, I've got a swap up. But for now, Atlanta, I have as the number 1 seed in the power rankings. And you take a look at their differentials: 1st in hardpoint, 1st in search, 1st in domination, and nobody's close. Plus 30 points nearly on average that they beat their opponents in hardpoint. Insane. And then in search and destroy, which it was a little bit of a wonky week for them in search, they're still holding a plus 1.43 round differential, which is the best in the league, again, by far. Same thing with domination. They win an average of 16 points per dom map, which again, no one's even above. I guess the only team that's close enough to that would be Optic Gaming. They've got a 10-point differential in their favor. So it's just one of those things. It's hard for me statistically to look at this Atlanta team and say that they deserve to be in the 2nd spot, even though, yes, they lost to Dallas a couple weekends ago. They did get through and win this championship in Florida, which is exactly what I said they needed to do to stay in the number 1 spot, and I'm mad at my word. So that's going to leave things off here for our power rankings. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. We will be doing a Rostermania video and then a setup video for predictions and format and things like that for the Seattle home series. So make sure you lock down that sub button, hit the notification. And again, if you like the video, like the video. Till next time, though, hope you guys all keep holding it down. So long.